Good evening, and welcome to the National Air and Space Society's Donald D. Engen Flight Jacket Night. My name is Elizabeth Wilson, and I'm the director of the National Air and Space Society and the Wall of Honor here at the museum. We're pleased to offer Society members the exclusive opportunity to experience tonight's program in recognition of your continued support through your membership donations and Wall of Honor contributions. So thank you, and now to introduce Captain Snodgrass, please welcome the director of the museum, General Jack Daly.
Well, thanks, Liz. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Since she's been here, Liz has made significant administrative and operational improvements in the National Air and Space Society, and as a result, the Society is growing larger and more involved. And it's a pleasure to see so many members here this evening, and thank you for your support. It's an honor to host the Vice Admiral Donald D. Engen Flight Jacket Night. This annual program presents speakers who exemplify our mission, which is to commemorate the history of flight and educate and inspire people about the science and technology of flight. Flight Jacket Night recognizes Vice Admiral Donald D. Engen, former director of the National Air and Space Museum, and this year we focused on the Centennial of Naval Aviation, and tonight's speaker truly fits the bill. As I introduce him, you will note recognition of his flying skills throughout his career. And from the very beginning, Captain Snodgrass became the definitive F-14 pilot. He began flying the aircraft straight out of flight school in 1974, which was unusual because the airplane was new at that time and no nuggets had been flying it. He was the first in that category and also the first to land or qualify day and night aboard ship. In 1978, he attended Top Gun, the Navy Fighter Weapons School, where the best pilots become instructors. And in 1985, he became the Navy's Fighter Pilot of the Year. The following year, when the movie Top Gun came out, people all over the country became F-14 fans. Captain Snodgrass, who flew for the film, trained so many young fighter pilots and staged so many dogfights in the F-14 that he became legendary. He also flew more displays over more years than any other military demo pilot. Flying the F-14 in war and peace, he has racked up more than 4,800 hours, making him the highest time Tomcat pilot in history, and there's no chance that anyone will surpass him because all the Tomcats are retired, which is a nice feature. Captain Snodgrass served 12 operational tours, including command of Fighter Squadron 33 during Desert Storm and as commander of Fighter Wing Atlantic, which included all the Navy's F-14s at that time. As an airshow performer, he has appeared in more than 850 events over the course of 20 years. In addition to the F-14, he's flown other legendary aircraft like the F-86 Sabre, the MiG-15, the MiG-17, the P-51 Mustang, F4U Corsair, Curtiss P-40, T-6 Texan, and the Super Decathlon. As the son of a World War II Marine aviator who flew F4U Corsairs in the Pacific, Captain Snodgrass has a natural affinity for old fighter aircraft. He's been designated one of the only 10 pilots who are authorized to fly in the Air Force Heritage Flight. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, but that's a formation of different era fighters from the Air Force. And those of you who are formation pilots know that dissimilar formation is one thing. This is the epitome of dissimilar formation flying. So please welcome Captain Dale Snort Snodgrass.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, General. I really appreciate that introduction. I guess I don't have to say anything. Questions? So, as a time-honored fighter pilot, of course, the speech should just be about me, and I think that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. But I had some of my guys from the jet team I'm on, the aerobatic jet team, the Black Diamonds, asked me said, this is very appropriate for you, Snort, to be in the museum because you are a museum piece. So with that, I'm going to press on. But could I get the first slide, please? Oh, there it is. Behind me is a G meter, and you see the G meter's pegged at just under 7, about 6 3/4 Gs. I do that routinely, but that was not me who put those Gs on that airplane. it was General Jack Daly here a year ago. He flew an MS-760. We took him out and did a 1v1 dogfight against an L-39, and guess who kicked butt? The general. And by the way, that was sustained 6.5 Gs. That was not just an instantaneous pull, and it happened more than once. So you can take an old fighter pilot and put him behind a desk in a magnificent museum, but he still has the skills and the heart and the cunning to go out and kick butt. So that was a great day. And I've had a number of flights with him, so hopefully this next year we'll go up again and maybe potentially an L-39. So it's a pleasure. I'm going to sort of walk you through my career in a sort of a supersonic way, because I could tell story after story after story, because I flew and were shipmates with magnificent men and some women, and we shared a lot and I could take you through various stories from dogfighting to flying to some great stories that happened on the beach in places far, far away. But tonight I'm just sort of going to walk you through it. Could I have the next slide, please? I came from a family, my father was a Marine aviator, and like a lot of really good naval aviators, they come out of a nepotistic society. So I grew up with my father, and he was a Marine pilot in World War II, started out in C-46s and then transitioned to Corsairs at the end of the war, and then became a test pilot. And as I grew up in Long Island, my father was working at Grumman, and so I had the pleasure and the distinction of having, or the privilege of having a bunch of great test pilots come over. Guys like Bob Smythe, who flew the first fight in the Tomcat, Pete Tamillo, Chuck Sewell, who did all the spin testing in it, and Don Evans, who did the famous air show in the Tomcat that beat the F-15 to send the airplanes to Iran, which, by the way, probably there may be a guy in Iran that will wind up with more flight time in the F-14 than I am, unless I can get over there and steal one. But it was truly an influential time in my life, because I was in high school and college, and I can say when these guys were around the house, it wasn't really influential. It was more like they corrupted me. So if you sit with old fighter pilots, or these guys were not old, but they were full-up test pilots, and a toddy or two flows, you get to hear some great stories. And I just learned at that point to listen, because listening for me became one of the keys to my career, particularly from my flying skills career. Because if you listen, just sit in the sideline and listen, particularly when people are in social environments, whether it be an O Club or at a party at a house, you can pick up some great pointers. And I did that throughout my career, and I'll tell about one story later on that it paid substantially good dividends. On the left, or right up here on the left, is the next. I'm passing the torch to my nephew. I don't have a son. I have wonderful daughters, none of which are pilots, but my nephew, who's the only boy in the family, is I'm surrounded by estrogen. I've got all these daughters and sisters and a couple wives too over time, but the end game is, but I have a magnificent one here, and I'd like to show Denise right over here, my wife. She's major support. But anyway, Reed is he's a Top Gun graduate, and he's a weapons school instructor right now flying the F-18 Super Hornet. So it's wonderful to have that lineage behind you. As I eventually got through college and went to flight school, then I started what I call the formative years, or the training years. And in that, I remember being at Pensacola, just going through pre-flight there, and one of the other guys in my class and I went down to Sherman, drove down a few miles down to Sherman, and I was blown away by seeing the Blues fly in F4s. The earth shook. When they did a dirty Delta loop, the earth shook, and I said, there's no, I was already completely biased towards fighters, but at that point it said, I'm going to go do that. And I just had to set my mind to it and make sure that no one else was ahead of me in flight school, so that when the time came, if you're the number one guy, then you basically get your choice. And that was my goal, and I worked very hard to do that. In the process, next slide, the A4, please. I wound up, the first thing to do is just break through and get to jets. And I did that, and then in jets, went through T2s and A4s, but it was always about doing the best, and I was very competitive. I was a swimmer in college, and so I worked exceptionally hard, and I was constantly working on flying, and I was almost hyper concerned with my grades, but in the end game it paid off because I got some good grades, and I wound up being at the top of the food chain out of 90 guys when it came time to select. And they had one F-14, first one, and actually with another guy, Rich Stark, he and I got the first two, and that was a huge privilege. But in that process, I had a couple of events that, you know, for a while there, I think I was pretty big stuff, but I was doing I was in T2s, and I was doing a formation check ride, 4-ship check ride, division flight, and I was dash 4, came in, and the instructor, we were doing breakup and rendezvous, and I was coming in, and I was number 4, and the instructor had intentionally pulled his power back and slowed down to 200 knots as opposed to the rendezvous speed of 250 to see how we all handle it. Well, the guy in front of me, number 3, descended and got low, and I came in and I thought it was very appropriate. I never thought about it, but I just did it naturally. I did a big barrel roll over the top and wound up right in formation, right, and everything was good. But that was not the Navy way. So I got my one and only down in flight school. The good news was I got 5 above averages on top of it, so I got an extra refly, and it worked out grade-wise, so I was very happy. And the next thing I just selected for my orders for Tomcat, so I was on top of the world, but I was in El Centro on a det, and we were dropping ordnance, our last air-to-ground pieces, and I had a few sorties to finish off, but my instructor knew that I'd selected for Tomcat, so he said, let's fly over the hill on a Friday night, Friday afternoon, and go to Miramar to the Oak Club, and you can check out your new home. So I was absolutely ecstatic about that. So I flew over there. We parked the airplane, we got our room in the BOQ, and then ran across the street to the Oak Club, and in my haste, I walked into 300 fighter pilots with my cover on. And in the Navy, you go in an Oak Club or any squad, you go in a Navy Oak Club in particular, a Marine Oak Club, and you walk in covered, you buy the bar. In this case, I bought the entire Oak Club as an ensign, 1 month's pay. Good news, I got a lot of free cocktails after that, but it was a long and tough story. But it's a tale that I remembered forever. So I had never gone into a club covered again. So then I went to, go ahead, the next one. And then I did finally show up in Miramar in VF-124, which had transitioned from being the F8 rag to the F-14 rag. It was new. They had VF-1 and 2 had just stood up, and VF-14, 32, 142, and 143 were going through the process of transitioning from F4s. And I checked in as an ensign with Rich Stark, my friend, on January 1st of 1974. And to this day, I still remember it. Miramar in those days had, I can't even remember how many squadrons are there. It was right after Vietnam. There were F4 squadrons stacked up everywhere. There were F8 squadrons. There was VF-1 and 2 and the F-14 rag, and the place was, I mean, the term Fighter Town, USA epitomized Miramar at that time. I remember there was different cadres. You had the F4 guys, which are the day-to-day guys that were doing the lion's work share of flying fighters, and they had sort of an average persona. Then there were the F-14 guys, which are a little bit on the prima donna side, and I proudly wore my little F-14 name tag as an ensign, and everybody thought I was like the, stash there or something, but I actually did get eventually to fly the airplane shortly thereafter. And then there were the F8 guys, which were actually my heroes at the time, because they'd come back, they would wear their dress, we didn't wear flight suits very often, you had to wear in your khakis all the time, but these guys had massively long mustaches, most of them. Their hair was really long, which I liked. And they didn't wear normal uniform shoes. Half of them would just wear cowboy boots. So they were a wild crowd. And I remember my very first flight in the Tomcat. It takes you about 45 minutes back those days to get out of the line because everything was breaking and stuff. So we finally get to the hold short, and I got this massive beast. I'd just been flying the A4 before, and I get in that thing, and I take it to the hold short, and they were stacked up with probably 8 F4s. But just in front of me were 2 F8s. And I finally moved up to the number 1 spot on the hold short, and these 2 F8s, they had the canopies open. I look over, guys with mustaches, and the one guy closest to me, he's smoking a cigarette. And they say, you cleared for takeoff, you cleared the position hold and cleared for takeoff. The guy goes like this, takes a cigarette, rubs it out on the side of the airplane, goes, canopy comes down. He doesn't even put his mask on, he just lets it hang, which is one of my things I did for my years too. But anyway, he gets on the runway, and the F8 had a hard light, and they went to full burner, did a low transition in section, and then went straight up to about 12,000 feet at the end on a departure they called the scamp departure. And I remember the guys going up, and they almost went to 0 airspeed because they just sort of backed down and fell off together. It was very, very cool. And I actually, came back into the club and looked for him on the next day, and I found him, and I asked him about all that, and they gave me the details of it. But it was a very cool place to go. And I had a blast. I went through carrier qualification. I was as the general said, I wasn't really privileged. I was the guinea pig. So I took the airplane out to the boat the first time on the Kitty Hawk, and I remember the day traps being fun, and then, if you get your first night trap, then you go, oh, this is not so much fun. And to this day, it's not that much fun. I finished up with about 450 night traps and about just under 1,300 total traps. But every one of those, I still get sweaty palms just thinking about it even. And I remember that first night, though, that first trap, and then I managed to get through the whole process without getting waved off and getting a bolter. So I did get a couple one wires, which is not good, but oh well, I survived it and then moved off to the East Coast. And I went to my first tour, which was the VF-142. Next slide, please. And that was a great squadron. Your first tour is always one of your momentous events as a naval aviator, and particularly as a fighter pilot. And my squadron was absolutely phenomenal. It was a place where I was surrounded with unbelievable talent, both leadership and aviation skills. Some of the best fighter pilots I've known were in that squadron. I had two COs. There were Vice Admiral Jerry Thunder Unruh, phenomenal 3,000-hour F8 guy and a magnificent fighter pilot and a leader. I had another mentor of mine, now retired Rear Admiral Bad Fred Lewis, who he and I over years became very competitive with each other, both dogfighting and landing on the boat. And I had a guy named Red Flash Dave Walker, who was a department head. He was an astronaut and a great fighter pilot, a test pilot, flew the F-14 in the test program. Had another guy, did moderately well in the Navy, a guy by the name of Jay Johnson, who retired as CNO a few years ago and is now the CEO of General Dynamics. Another great friend and a great fighter pilot. Another guy by the name of Alex Rucker, who was retired as a commander, got out at 20 years and went to the airlines, but was a Renaissance man, spoke multiple languages. Was great when you're on cruise with a guy like that, by the way. That's a huge benefit. And then he was also he was a Top Gun instructor, a great fighter pilot, and a great instructor, and really helped me move my skill sets in the world of air combat forward very rapidly. So I was surrounded by these magnificent pilots, and I say pilots because as I went through, I had great respect for any naval officer who was a senior to me because you just had to, but I really did want to emulate the ones that were really, really good pilots, because that was my goal. I wanted my career to move forward, but I just really wanted to become the best fighter pilot I could be and be as good or better than anybody who's walked around in the Tomcat community. And with that, there were a bunch that were that, but when they were really good pilots, most of them were really good leaders. Not all of them continued to promote because they were also very good at other things. So some of which deterred from their overall officer fitness reports. But notwithstanding, I decided I want to try and tread that line. So I worked very hard on being the best fighter pilot I could and landing on the boat. And I was in this supreme squadron where it was always highly competitive and great fun. And through that process, as you get in your first squadron, the first thing you want to do is just survive. And then you learn, and then eventually you blossom. And that occurred for me towards the latter part of my first cruise, and then all through my second cruise. And it was a lot of fun, to the point that I started being equal to these guys in air combat, and actually starting to win, and then win more frequently. And then worked really hard on being a really good carrier pilot, because you can be the best fighter pilot in the world, but if you can't land on the boat in the middle of the night, you're going home, or you have to transfer to the Air Force. So, right, Stroker? Slick? I've got a couple of my teammates up there who are famous F-16 drivers, so but they'll understand this. So, but it was a great time, and I learned, and I became an LSO, landing signal officer at the time, because I really wanted to. If you're going to be the best carrier pilot you can be, you should know how it all works out and be able to grade other people, and I did that, and that was a phenomenal job that I carried on for the next 2 tours, and it was just a blast. Let me see here. And so it was just a blast. I remember, but one of the nicest things is in that time I got to go back, great privilege, I got to go back to Grumman and pick up a brand new airplane where my father was working in flight test, and all those Grumman test pilots, where I was a little teenager and a college guy, where they were having their 25th martini at my house. I got to come back and rub shoulders to shoulders with them and pick up the number 100th built F-14. And that was a very special day for me because my father was there, and it was sort of became a full circle event. So it was a truly momentous day. Let me see here. But a big job in that whole process was I became an LSO. And as an LSO, I left the squadron and I moved on to VF-101 as an instructor pilot. And my job there was to be the Air Wing LSO. And that's a great job because you hold guys' careers in your hands, literally. So it was a very challenging and rewarding process. In there, you take brand new guys like myself, and I'd done it, a couple of 3 years before, brand new pilots to the F-14, other seasoned pilots transitioning to the F-14, and others coming back for current training. And you take them out to the boat and get them qualified. And as a young lieutenant, you held the hammer. Even the CO of the squadron or the admiral couldn't say no to you. If you said he was qualified, then he was qualified. If you said he was not qualified, then he was out of the pool and had to go back and start the process again. And I remember I had one student, a guy named Brian Olson, and his call sign was Bam Bam because he was like a Nordic god. He was like 6'2", chiseled, and I just wanted to hang around him when he went into the O Club and the girls were there. But he could not land on the boat. He could not fly, in the beginning anyway. So he went through field carrier practice. We took him out to the boat, and he DQ'd, disqualified. So he went back. He had a board, said, okay, let's send him out again. He goes out again, and he didn't qualify again. And normally that'd be the end of the game. But the other LSO, a guy named Chris Wheatrick Wheatley and I, labored over this long time, and we thought that there was a spark in there, sort of like, light has a better idea, Ford has a better idea, and turn the light on. And so we didn't plead, but we recommended to the board and to the commanding officer, and actually all the way up to the 3-star admiral, that he gets yet a third chance. And thank God, because our careers would have been over personally for Wheatley and I, but he went through the process, he qualified, and then lo and behold, halfway through his next cruise, he was the top JO in the wing. So it's just about working and believing in people and trying to pass on that information. Simultaneously, I was also flying tactics, flying a lot of ACM in the squadron, and I got the privilege of being one of the 2 guys to jump over and fly the A4, which is a great, great airplane, and had a great time doing that. Then I went off to be a CAG LSO, and as a CAG LSO, you still do some training, but now you're taking care of the operational needs and operational carrier landing of the guys on the ship. So I did that, and that was a great time, and we had some very interesting events that occurred there. I mean, sometimes you're out there in a dark night, stormy night. It's the LSO that helps get the guy back aboard, and sometimes it's even myself in the airplane, and the other LSO helps me. And I remember in the North Atlantic, the captain and the admiral, we used to walk me out and say, okay, Snort, let's go for a walk this morning. And we go out on the flight deck, and the deck's going up and down 20 feet, 25 feet, 15 feet, howling 40-knot winds. And as a young lieutenant commander, the captain and the admiral say, is the Air Wing going to fly today? And I remember this one day, it was really rugged, and I said, no, I don't think we should fly today. But we have to stand alerts. So he said, okay, pick out the pilots that should be standing alerts, the more seasoned guy. And I, of course, was on that list. So I'm standing the alert. And we transitioned from alert 15 to alert 5. We're actually in the flight deck, and lo and behold, coming around the Kola Peninsula is a Tu-95 Bear. Oh my God, I have to launch now. So I was actually the second guy. The airplane in front of me went down, so I get to the catapult, and unfortunately my airplane did not go down. It didn't break. And I launched off into these massive seas and massive winds, and to go intercept. They launched an E-2 and myself, and that was it for the day. I rendezvous on the Bear. He does his perfunctory flyby the carrier where you have to be, between him and the carrier, so the pictures are all show a Tomcat or something in a Navy airplane in between him. He does that, and now it's time. He goes away, heads home, or actually we headed to Cuba, and I have to come back and land. and the deck is going up and down 30-plus feet, and I am like petrified. And I come around the corner, and on my 13th attempt, I was able to trap. The E-2, they send him to Norway because he had enough gas. I didn't have enough gas, and they didn't want to launch a tanker because he'd be in the same scenario I was. So I came around, and I finally trapped in this, and the deck had slowed down enough. It's only like 15 feet. I trap, and I have to back up a couple passes. I came around, and as you're turning into the groove, rolling in the groove, I saw all 4 screws of the USS Nimitz plopping out of the water. The flight deck is like this, and then it goes like this, and then it goes like this, and you go, this is not a good day. It's 40 knots of wind, 45 knots of wind, sea state of 25 to 30 feet, and anyway, I finally get aboard, and I'm just, thank you, and then I raise the hook, clear the wires, and they start to tax me, and then the deck rolls to port. Stroker, that's to the left, okay? Port is left. Stroker's money on Air Force buds. Anyway, it rolls port, and the deck is fairly slippery, and I start to slide. I mean, literally, I slid almost 2/3 of the distance of this auditorium over towards the wrong edge, over towards the port side, which is the water, and that's not a good anyway. Young kids on the flight deck, amazing. They were throwing hooks on the cable, throwing hooks on the airplane, chains on it, trying to stop me. Chains were popping as this 54,000-pound airplane at that point, or probably less than that. It was probably about 48,000 pounds with the fuel I had, sliding. And in fact, in that process, a chain, it fractured one guy's arm and broke another guy's leg, trying to keep me from going over the side. So these young 18-year-olds who carry chains around for a living on a flight deck are an amazing, amazing group, and I'm forever indebted to them that day. But fortunately, Neptune, fighter gods of the world said, nah, not your day, Snort, because if I had to punch out, it was a done deal, because 40, 45 knots of wind, sea state 30, the ocean was just a giant white froth. I mean, if I jumped out, it was all over. There's no way a helicopter could pick me up. There's no way anybody could find me. I'd be at the bottom of the ocean somewhere. So, but fortunately, the boat starts to go the other way, and Snort starts to go the other way. But I don't care, because the island's over there. So I didn't quite make it to the island. I made about back across the landing area, and the guys finally got me chalked, and I shut down and said, they don't pay me enough for this one. But it was one of those things where, I should have said not even alerts. Next day I said not even alerts for the Admiral. So that was my tours at Kagula. So I had one bad accident where a guy landed long and landed right in an EA-6B and wound up having a disaster, and saw 11 fine people die that night. And that was a tragedy, but that's part of the game on a carrier sometimes. Then, subsequent to that, after 2 years of doing that, I also, in that process, I was flying with VF-41, and I was involved in the Gulf of Sidra shoot-down in 1981, and that was a unique time because, A, we actually got to engage bad guys, but the only problem was the rules of engagement wouldn't let you shoot down the bad guys unless they shot at you. And the day of the shoot-down, I was actually in a 2v2 engagement with 2 MiG-25s 30 miles away when the fitters shot their ATOLs at my wingman, or my other squadron mates, 40 miles away. We're on the same frequency. My wingman, including my wingman, CEO of the squadron, Hank Kleeman was the lead guy, and Larry Muzinski was the wingy, and they went and they assassinated these 2 fitters, which was, appropriate. But meanwhile, I'm over here engaged with the two MiG-25s, and I couldn't fire at them or take them out because they hadn't shot at me. It's a very bad ROE. It was so bad. In fact, I remember early in the morning, both the Admiral and the Air Wing Commander came to me and said, Snort, only if they shoot. Physically told me. He walked up to me and said, only if they shoot at you, because they was afraid I was going to do something stupid, and I almost did. I had that MiG-25 I had master arm on, gun selected, locked, and Pipper bouncing around the canopy in the back end of the top of the airplane. And while the fight's going on with live missiles going off downrange, and I still couldn't do it. So to this day, I sort of regret the fact that I didn't pull the trigger on that one, because I probably would have ended my career. I would have been a lieutenant commander, but I had a gun kill on a MiG-25, which is, I'd probably take it, so. all my retirement goes to my ex-wife, so what difference does it make if I'm a lieutenant commander or a captain? So anyway, so it was a great event, and there was some great stories that happened after that, but this I'm talking too long, so I want to get through this. Then I went back and I went to VF-43 as a adversary instructor, weapons school instructor, and split my time between VF-43 at Oceana and Top Gun on the West Coast, and that was a blast there. Next slide, please. In that time frame, I flew the F5 and the A4. 321 was my favorite airplane, by the way. That was a Super Fox, had a 408 engine, 11,200 pounds of thrust, and that airplane was super light. There was nothing in it. And that thing, when you got to about 2/3 gas, was a rocket ship. It was 1-to-1 thrust to weight at that point. And the airplane could turn really well, fly slow. For those of you who are fighter pilots and fought against it, you know it's flown well. It was an awesome airplane and a rolling scissors. Very difficult to defend against. In fact, to this day, I'd take an A4 Super Fox and go fight most any airplane out there. Maybe less than F-22, but unless they gave me AIM-9X, and then I'd still do it. But that was a grand tour. I had great times. Flying Red Air is massively fun. Sometimes it's not too hard. It's not the most tactical. I mean, it's tactical, but you don't have to work too hard because you're paid to die essentially. But the best thing about that tour was almost after every single flight, we did a 1v1 in-house hack, which means we went and fought 1v1 guns only. And I must have had, I can't tell you how many 1v1 guns only. And that, for me, is still the pinnacle of flying an airplane, is close air combat, 1 versus 1, who can fly the best jet. And we got so good at it that we actually we developed sort of we called it the School of Spank. So we had, as guys came into the squadron instructors, they started out with their bachelor's degrees, and then eventually they submitted their requirements and went in for their masters, and then they submitted their paperwork, not their paperwork, but they submitted this, okay, we're up for their doctorate. And so we wound up with this hierarchy of, we had masters and then we had doctors. We called them the doctors of Spank. And it was just massively fun and flew our tails off. I remember one dead in Key West, 2 weeks by myself, one F5, I was flying 3 to 4 goes a day, every day for 2 weeks, and then go to Duval Street at night. It was heaven. So it was really good. And I remember I was very, very proud. One day I was the ops officer of the squadron. I came into my office and they had stenciled on on the wall and it said, Snort, Snodgrass, and it said the Dean of Spank. So I was very, very, very happy about that. Till I got gunned the next day. Then the Dean thing came off. I had to go back to being just a doctor. But anyway, it was a great time. Subsequent to that, I moved on to my department head tour, which is it's sort of a transition tour for Navy guys, because that's where you have to, you got to start serious, you got to start becoming serious about command and taking care of everything. And so I went on that squadron, joined them on cruise on the Dwight D. Eisenhower, and then after a couple months I became the operations officer for a year, and I was then the maintenance officer, and I worked for, go ahead to the next slide. Oh, go back to that one, go back one more time. I've got to look at it. I brought this slide out I'm flying on a magnificent civilian jet team, which I'll show pictures later, called the Black Diamond Jet Team, and we fly L-39s and MiG-17s, which in fact we're doing a show tomorrow in Cocoa Beach. But Jared Eisenman, who owns most of the airplanes on the team, has a couple A4s and is being restored right now to fly. So he's a big A4 fanatic and is actually qualified in the A4 right now. And I brought this out. This was a combination flight between VF-43 and Top Gun with all those A4s coming in, and that was an opposing break. So we all broke 2 at a time, boom, boom, opposite, and then landed, and then dovetailed in behind each other on the runway. So I put that one in for my jet team buddies up there. So that was a great time. Next one. The dogs, the world-famous puking dogs. I mean, you got to love a squadron that has a name like that. And I've had so many fun tours, but this one was exceptionally fun. And the reason why, again, magnificent leadership. The CEO and the XO of the squadron, a guy named Captain Moon Simmons, and now retired Vice Admiral Charger Balcom, who was a Rio and flew with me. They were just pieces of work. And Moon put a squadron together that was, I guess the best way to put it, it was a motorcycle gang that your mother was proud of. And it was a blast. And I, as the operations officer, I had the job of trying to bring in new guys into the squadron. Now, pick guys from the training squadron to come into the squadron. And we got I remember this one, I did this to all of them, but this one Rio came in and he was interviewing for the squadron. He was slated but not given orders, so he's coming over to get his final little, omni that is good to transfer to us. And I bring him into the ops officer and I gave him my standard speech. Okay, what have you done? What do you do? So then I asked him, okay, what kind of car do you have? And he goes, he's a bachelor. I said, what kind of car do you have? He says, I have a Honda Civic. I roll my eyes. Okay? And then I go, do you have a girlfriend? Nope. When was your last date? I don't know, 3 months ago. I go, wait a minute. You have a Honda and you haven't been on a date for 3 months? How do you expect to even function in the squadron? So I told him, I'd consider going and get a new car. I was sort of joking with him, but half-hearted. I said, I'd consider go out getting a new car, and I would maybe try and find a date this weekend, so so you can come in the right frame of mind on Monday, and maybe we'll talk about it again on Monday. He doesn't come in Monday. Tuesday comes in. He's got a brand new Corvette and a big smile on his face. And I just saw him about a year ago, and he actually. He stayed in the Navy, but he transitioned over, and he's a doctor, and he still has a Corvette, and he's still a bachelor and still enjoying life very much. So I passed on that little tidbit to him. So that was checking my notes here. So that was a wonderful squadron, and we had some great times, and I remember at the Oak Club one night, this Marine squadron came in, and they were brand new Hornet guys. The guy was a Top Gun instructor. They were big talk, and we were supposed to fight him the next day. And long story short, they came out, and we were scheduled to fly him in the bar at the Oceana. We finally wound up. This guy was bragging and said, we can beat a Tomcat all day long. And so I go to the CO, my CO, and I say, Skipper, can we train this around and do this guy a 1v1? And I told the guy, we're only going to do the 1v1 if, this was on Wednesday, on Friday night, whoever loses buys the other squadron buys the winner squadron all the cocktails and all the roast beef and all the shrimp you want all night long. And so I went out the next day and fought this guy, but I set it up. If you're a fighter pilot, you got to cheat. So I tell him I have to do a post-maintenance check flight. So I said, I'll go out to the downrange end of the range, and then I'll meet you, we'll do an intercept, and we'll set up, and we'll do a split, and then we'll turn in. So I go down there, I dump gas. I dump 10,000 pounds of gas. I'm down to 6,000 pounds. I merge with the guy, I sweep the wings back, bleed off, he thinks I'm going 450 knots. As we turn in, I go idle, boards, turn back in, the wings come forward. I have, in the Tomcat, there was a prohibitive maneuver of using full flaps, but I turned it into art science. So I pulled the aux slack circuit breaker, pulled the mid-compression bypass circuit breaker, which gave me another 2,000 pounds of thrust, put the main flaps down, went to burner, merged at 325, and he was going 450, and I was inside his term. He freaked and pulled like a dope, like I thought he might, and then bled all his airspeed. Then I went in the vertical and came back down and gunned him in about 42 seconds. And then he said, let's set up another. I said, I'm bingo. Meanwhile, the squadrons are in the tax range watching all this stuff and go, okay, so my guys all get up and say, we'll see you Friday night. And we did. So it wasn't that I was that much a better pilot, it's just I cheated better. So that's a huge deal. Then I went off to be XO of VF 101, and then I went to my command tour, which is the best thing you can do in the Navy, and in life, I think, is be command of a fighter squadron. I took that whole motorcycle gang thing. I picked up on all the guys that I had mentored from over the career, and I took the best I could of all of them, and then I snorterized the whole thing and had my squadron and did the same kind of hiring practices, and we had a great time. There was a lot of people in the community at the time thought that I, in fact, would have a motorcycle squadron, but there were also lots that bet that my mother would not be proud of it. So, but in fact, we did exceptionally well. We won most of the awards, and we had a great time. And everything we did, we just focused on it and did to the best. And it's amazing when you get a unit that is motivated, focused, they know what the goals are, and everybody supports that process. And it was a time of my life until I became the wing commander. Then I was a even greater time. But at that point, it was magnificent. I remember we went to Key West on a gun det, and shooting air-to-air gunnery was one of my other favorite things to do. And at that time, in the F-14 community and FA community, there was you shoot at this banner being towed behind an airplane. It's about 10 feet high and about 30, 40 feet long. And if you had 4 airplanes out there and you got 100 hits on it, which is called a Centurion banner, that was a massively big thing. So in the VF-143, we got up to the point we got 300. We got a triple Centurion banner, which at that point was even unheard of. And when I took my squadron down to Key West for 2 weeks, all we did was air-to-air gunnery. I had all of the pilots go out, because when you score banners, every airplane has painted bullets, so there's red hit, okay, so you can count whose bullets went in the banner. And I had, normally the ordnancemen do that, but I had my JOs and all the pilots and the RIOs paint the bullets in the hot sun in Key West. So everybody painted their own bullets, I mean literally thousands of bullets. And when they went to shoot them, they paid a lot more attention. They tracked better, their whole skill set, they were focused more, and we wound up with a 512 hit banner, which I think still is maybe the highest one ever shot, at least in the Navy. So it was a lot of fun and a great time. And then I had probably the biggest, as a commanding officer, what's the biggest thing you could have happen in your life? And that's to go into take your squadron to combat. So Desert Storm came around, I got extended, which was a very big thing, and I stayed in the squadron and took it over we went in the Red Sea and went into Desert Storm. As we went over there, Desert Storm sounded like it was going to be a great air war because they had a lot of airplanes. So everybody was very, anxious, a lot of anxiety, but a lot of training, and we had just come off a big training cycle and didn't go through the normal 3-month, 4-month, 6-month build-up cycle. We just went right from air wing training at Fallon and went right to war. And so we were really prepped tactically. And we showed up on station and had, and then launched into the event, which is history now. The only problem with it was the big air war never happened. They all flew to Iran. And I was a strike leader, and I did a number of strikes, and I remember one in particular, one of the war stories, one war story I'll give you it was the third night. I was a strike leader, had a 34-plane package. We had 8 Tomcats doing fighter sweeps in front of the strike package, which was 8 A6s, then a number of F-18s were harm shooters, EA6s that were jamming, and E2s. And we launch off of there, and we go in, and we're targets just on the northwest side of Baghdad, a power plant and a rail yard. And the A6 is going to drop tons of Mark 84 1,000-pounders in there. And we launch, and all of a sudden that night there was a little bit of activity, airborne activity. So we're all hot to trot, and I actually get a radar lock, and there's a thing called PID, positive identification. So you had to have all sorts of off-board and on-board sensors to tell you it really was a bad guy, so you're not shooting at a bad guy. And as a strike leader that night before we launched, the last thing I said is I just looked at the air tasking order, the ATO, which showed where all the what coalition airplanes were going to be airborne at that point. And I went down the list, and there wasn't a single coalition fighter that had one afterburner. Everybody had 2 burners, 2 engines. And the night before, some 21s had been flying around. So I basically, as a last minute thing before we broke up, I said, last thing, if you see an airplane with a single burner, shoot first and ask questions later. So fast forward, in the strike, I'm going up and I'm sort of radar locked on trying to figure out if it is a bad guy. Everybody's saying it's a bandit, so we're trying to correlate everything. And then all my raw gear goes off, radar warning gear goes off, and I have get locked up, and you just had the sixth sense, but I couldn't tell what direction, but it was an SA-3 and missile, in fact, and I was turning right, and I looked right, and then I looked left, and I saw the glow coming out of the undercast. And you sort of seen movies of it and that kind of stuff, but well, it's weird looking. You know, it's kind of greenish, glowish thing, and then, but you could tell one thing: the bearing wasn't changing, and the range was decreasing very, very fast, and that was not a good thing. So, and I was about 27,000 feet, right at Mach 0.95, 0.98, and so wings were back. I was fairly loaded with airplanes. We had 6 missiles on and rails and everything and tanks, and so the missile came up, and I dropped. We went full chaff and flares, did a big high G barrel roll. When I say high G, I'm talking 9 to 10 Gs over the top, which, by the way, I'll roll back to things you listen to. I remember that my whole career just talking about Gs is I remember in my father's house, the Grumman test pilot saying that Tomcat is a 13 G airplane. You know, the Navy said it was a 6.5, 7 G airplane, but I always remember that 13 Gs, and I overstressed a lot of airplanes in my time, and I think I just all rolled it back to those test pilots, and it's a 13 G airplane. But anyway, I did about a 9 to 10 G pull over the top, chaff and flares, and the missile missed and went behind me. There was a flash where it detonated, but in that process, the F-14, the airplane departed. It had a nasty characteristic of going out of control and into departure and eventually spins at that Mach level, at that Mach number, with a rolling pull, high G pull, and with that loadout, in other words, have rails and missiles on the belly, where it had reduced the lift. So sure enough, just as the test pilot said, airplane goes, wow, goes divergent on me, and then I do for X amount of time, I'm doing all the pilot stuff. And process of that, I have an engine that stalls, I bring that back to idle, and I eventually shut that engine down. And in the process, because I was going super fast, roll down like this, and then go into this octaflugeron and pull out. I pulled out 11,000 feet over Baghdad on night number 3, and you saw this air-to-air stuff, flak coming up. Well, I was right on top of it. And it was like being on top of the fireworks, except there was a couple coming up and around here. It wasn't aimed fire, but I was in the middle of it. And the problem with that, I was at 250 knots, and the F-14 does not relight until you have 325 knots. So my choice was descend in mill power down into the stuff, or go to one burner, which I had briefed everybody. If you see one burner, shoot you down. So I go, boy, I'm never going to say that again. So I compromised and I tried one start low, and it was starting to be a hot start, so I shut it down again and then did another, and I went to min burner and went down a little bit and finally got it lit and then got both burners on and climbed out of the gunk and went home and said, keep your mouth shut, Snort, brief the brief and don't ad lib at the end. So, but that was the culmination, and right after that, right at the end of Desert Storm, I left my squadron and went back home. To the next one. And then I got to my next job. Once you get a squadron command, the Navy normally says payback. You got to get paid back. So I wind up, you either go to a carrier or a seaborne staff, like a carrier cargo staff, or you go to the ship as the air boss or the ops officer. And most fighter guys either went to be air boss or the ops officer or went to the cargo staff. But I decided to be kind of cool or something different anyway, to go to be the navigator. So I pleaded with the Bureau to send me to be navigator, which has been held by the P3 guys forever. But I got to be the navigator on the Theodore Roosevelt. The reason I did it was because it's got a great stateroom. It's up on the top of the bridge. I got a nice seat on the looking out window seat all the time. I actually have a port light in my room. A port light is like a window. There's only 3 cabins on the ship that have windows: the admiral's at-sea cabin, the captain's at-sea cabin, and the navigators. And plus, when you pull into port, you don't have to navigate, so I could be on the beach every day. So that was an extra benefit. But it was a great tour. I mean, I can't say it was a great tour. It was a fun tour. It was my black shoe appreciation tour. But one thing I noticed is that I sort of applied my fighter pilot training to the ship, and we were in the Mediterranean, and we were doing what I call a box ops. You get basically a 30-mile square, and you got to keep the carrier inside that, and you run upwind, you run downwind, and then you turn around and you run upwind to launch the airplanes, recover the airplanes, and you turn around and run downwind. On an hour-and-a-half cycle, you don't have a lot of time to do that. And when I got there, it was taking 30 minutes to turn the carrier around, because you don't want the deck to heel. So I said, 30 minutes? I mean, we go 30 minutes, turn around, we go for 15 minutes at 25 knots, and then we do another 30 minutes to turn around. And so you're always sliding out of the box. So I decided that since it was a nuke carrier, I decided to try something. So I said, I got it. We were steaming at 25 knots, and I just basically, I didn't take the comm, but I had the lee helmsman, or the helmsman. I told him a little right rudder, and I gave him like 3 degrees right rudder, and the ship starts to turn. But as soon as it turns, it starts to heel. But there's a finite amount of time before it doesn't. So I get some turn in. Meanwhile, I bring the engines back to 1/3, and then we continue to do that, fly the thing through the turn, and then eventually when I got down to about 15 knots, I went all ahead standard or all ahead full on the outboard engines, and and all ahead 1/3 on the inboard. It's a differential power, and you could actually, I kept the flight deck within 3 degrees, but we got the turn rate down from 30 minutes down to 8 minutes, which means it could go downrange at 25 knots for, almost into 40 minutes before we had to turn around. So it was kind of fun, and but you got a different breed there with the nuke guys down in the power plant, the engineers down there, and you want to what? Anyway, so I finally convinced them that we could do that, and they actually appreciated the challenge. So it was a great tour. But once again, had a magnificent CO, a guy by the name of Steve Abbott, retired 4-star, Rhodes Scholar. He's too smart for me, actually, but it was a great time because he let me run the ship. He would go fly, or he'd be down in the reactor room or something, and I'd sit in the captain's chair and run the flight ops or do alongside stuff with the supply ships or the oilers. So that was an awesome tour. From there, I didn't have a slide for this because it's horrible. I went for 10 months in the Pentagon. I don't even want to talk about it. And then, next slide. And then I went to Fighter Wing. I got slated to go be the Fighter Wing Fighter Wing commander at Oceana, which had the administrative control of all the F-14 squadrons. We'd single-sided everybody from the West Coast. We had all the Tomcats, and it was a great time. But I remember, and it was the ultimate license to steal as far as flying. In 3 years of flying, 3 years of being the wing commander, I flew, I think I got something like 1,400 hours. I mean, I was flying my tail off. I flew twice a day, every day. So I abused the system, which is what I was designed to do. Anyway, but one of the great things, I think, one of the biggest, it's one of the proudest moments I have in my life so far, and I think the group of people that I was at the time was a very special group. And when I took over command on a Friday, the next Monday I had a meeting with some folks from a think tank up here called Whitley, Bradley, and Brown. And Hey Joe was here. Hey Joe's here somewhere, but he was one of the architects of this. And they came in my office with a plan, and we'd already known about it, and I was fed up with the Navy as far as its care and feeding of the Tomcat community up until that point. And the Navy had also gotten rid of all the A6s, so the carrier battle groups and the Naval Aviation really didn't have a very good precision strike platform. And obviously, Desert Storm had proven that precision strike, laser-guided weapons at that point were a critical capability. And these guys came in and we talked about it, and the discussion was to bring the Air Force's F-15E designed lander, which also went to the Vipers, F-16s, and put it on an F-14. Now you would say that'd be easy, but it wasn't, because the F-14, particularly the A models, were all analog, and that was a digital pod, so you really needed a 1553 digital bus so that things could talk back to each other. Well, we came up with a plan, and the beauty of this thing was we didn't want Washington to really be involved at all. No acquisition, no NavAir Syscom, no nothing. So I went to Admiral Sweepy Allen, who was Airland, and we got called a fleet prototype rule, and where we could do one-off things. And so from the handshake in my office on the Monday after I took command of Fighter Wing, 6 months later, we dropped a laser-guided bomb off an F-14. And we hit a home run because we embedded a GPS in the pod, which stabilized the pod and its capability. Where the pod was on the wing, you could slave either way, so you could drop the bomb and either turn left or turn right and depart. We also hit a triple home run with a display in the back seat called the PTID, and it was a brand new thing going on there. And they said, okay. But what happened is it magnified the display. So it was a high pixel count kind of display. So we got 12 power magnification out of the FLIR as opposed to a Strike Eagle, which had 8 power. And in the Vipers and the Hornets, they were down in the 4 power category. So we could see things. And with the GPS on there, it was an amazing capability. And so the F-14 went from essentially a dying animal to a national treasure. And it became, we transitioned the whole community from just a pure fighter pilot, pure air-to-air thing into a multi-role precision strike fighter. And we wound up both in Desert Storm 2 and Afghanistan. As the airplane was weaned out of the Navy in 2005, it left with its best history of its career, to the point where there were missions where F-14s were literally taking in 4 and 6 F-18s or F-16s and designating their targets for them. It became a great FAC-A platform. So it really was, it makes my heart very proud that the Tomcat community in the end game was a highly lethal and capable airplane. While I was at Top Gun, while I was at Fighter Wing, of course I flew tactically every day, but I also sustained my airshow life. Next slide. So in that process, I'd been flying demos on and off for 8 or 10 years prior to that, but as a Fighter Wing commander, the Commodore, I had 2 demo teams from the RAG that were on the road almost every weekend on flying air shows around the country. I decided it would be appropriate that I had my own team. So I stood up the Commodore's team, and I started primarily flying with the Flight of the Cats, which I'd done for a number of years. Normally flew a multi-plane event with Tiger Cat, a Hellcat, a Wildcat, and a Bearcat, and the Tomcat. And eventually, when I was there, the guy who led the airplane in the Tiger Cat, we started talking, and we said, we might try the Flight of the Twin Cats. So, being the approval authority, I made an instruction and signed and approved myself to do it, which was a good thing. So we started. I went out to Kalamazoo, started flying with this guy for a week, came back, and we did, with the Tiger Cat, I did a formation takeoff, and we did formation aerobatics with a World War II fighter in the Tomcat. So I flew the slot position, and we did barrel rolls and half Cubans, along with the multiple passes, and to this day, it's never been done, and I'm not sure that the system will ever allow that to happen again, but that was a great thrill. And that transitioned me into the airshow world, which I continued. Subsequent to Fighter Wing, next slide, I went to the big building over here. I was Director of Legislative Affairs for the House for the Navy, and spent 2 years running around in a suit and tie going all around the country. I'm not going to bore you with congressional stories and codels and what happens in far places away with congressmen and congresswomen, because that's a whole nother book, and some of them are still, it's a re-election year too, so I don't want to spoil it for them. But it was a great time also. I met some great friends, Marnie and C.W. Galuli, and I had a Super Decathlon at the time, and C.W. was a great Navy A-7 pilot and LSO, and turned out to be a great friend there. And while he was gone one time, I got his wife drunk and sold my Decathlon to him. So he didn't know for a week actually, but he came home and finally he found out that he bought my Decathlon. But it was a very inspiring tour because it was very heady too, because as a Navy captain, I only dealt with my 2-star boss in the Pentagon, plus Undersecretary and Secretary of the Navy, Vice Chief, and the CNO. So it was in fact, when I retired out of that job, they were all there for my retirement. So it was kind of, they didn't really come for me. They just came to schmooze with the congressmen and senators. But it was still kind of a fun, interesting tour. And then I retired. But when I retired, I went to become an airshow pilot. I decided I was going to transition, not remain in the Navy, and track down being an admiral. I was going to go be an airshow pilot because everybody in the Navy at some point FOSS, which is failure of officer to select. So I decided I'd go on my own, and for the last 11, 12 years, I've been doing full-time airshow work. And I've had the privilege of flying great airplanes. So right now, I'm current in the Corsair. I fly that on the airshow. P-51, hold that slide right there. Chris Baranakis, where are you, Chris? Stand up, Chris. Stand up. That's Chris's Mustang. His dad and he own that airplane, and I fly that on the airshow circuit. And if you think it's a privilege to fly that airplane, it's a privilege to fly with and help train a young man like Chris, who is, by the way, is going to the dark side. He's been selected to go to the Air Force Guard and fly F-15. So how many young guys going through flight school own their own P-51? So it's very, very cool. And that was my baby for a number of years, flying on the airshow circuit. It's currently down to Valiant Air Command, but that's a F-86 Sabre. Magnificent airplane, flies wonderfully. Airplanes that look good fly good, and this one is a special airplane. It's got magnificent flight controls, the harmony, no fly-by-wire, no anything, but it's an absolute pure airplane and wonderful. I also like to fly low. And I had this photographer at Oceana, and he wanted to get some movies, some low passes head on, so I gave him one. So anyway. But as the general has said, I get the privilege of flying in my exchange tour with the Air Force, and I've done it for the last 10 years, and that's flying in the Heritage Flight. Get to fly with all the active duty demo pilots in the Air Force, in F-15s, F-16s, A-10s, F-22s, and it's truly a privilege. And we get to fly all the cool vintage airplanes with it. In that case, we've got a P-38, and this picture, go back to the next one, please. That's an all-jet Heritage Flight taken behind a C-130, but obviously a Raptor, and an F-86, and then this F-4 flown by one of our current team members of Black Diamond, Jerry Kirby, and then straight F-15C below. Interesting thing about flying behind a Raptor is that I knew it had asymmetric thrust, but I always thought it would go symmetric. It's not asymmetric thrust. I thought it was symmetric, but you had variable nozzles to give the pitch rate. But they actually move asymmetrically, and they move about that fast. 250 knots straight and level. Those nozzles are going, and it's very loud also, and lots of weird Bernoullis. I was almost full stick forward right there to keep myself from being sucked up onto the airplane. And right now I have the privilege, I think we missed one slide. Maybe it'll come up. Nope. All right, we're a little bit out of order. But I have the privilege of flying with a new jet team this year, made up of some spectacular drivers, and we're having a blast. It's called the Black Diamond Jet Team, and right now I'd like to introduce Jared. Stand up, please. Jared Isaacman is the right wing. Can we go to, yeah, save on that slide. Jared is the owner of the team and the CEO of United Bank Card Services, which sponsors us, and we're highlighting the Make-A-Wish Foundation this year. And to about 2.5 years ago, Jared had never flown formation. And with myself and our team lead, Jerry Kirby, and some other folks, both he and the left wing, Doug, you're here? Doug, stand up. Right here. Both these two guys are young guys who fly as good formation as I've ever known in the Navy. And as you can tell how tight they are right there. And in the slot is my son, my pseudo-son, Stroker, Sean Gustafson, Major, United States Air Force, Reserve, Thunderbird slot pilot 2009 and 2010. So we have some talent on the team. The shot before, you saw the L-39 beside the MiG, which I fly, and that was flown by Major Slick Baum, John Baum. Where are you, John? Slick right here. So Slick he was left wing on the U.S. Thunderbirds, United States Air Force Thunderbirds in 2000 and 2010. And he flies now both left wing, slot, right wing, opposing solo. So he is our jack of all trades. Next. And I fly the MiG-17 as the solo because I'm a solo performer and I have to have an airplane with more thrust than the other guy so I can do what I do. But right there I'm doing a roll around. Remember I told you about the canopy roll in the beginning in flight school? Well, I finally get to do it for real and actually do it legitimately. So it's great fun. Next. And that's a stand-away picture of our 5 ship with me rolling around him in the MiG. I can't tell you how much fun that is. Except when our flight lead, Jerry Kirby Jive, decides that instead of being at 200 feet today, he's at 100 feet. Then at the bottom, it gets a little dicier, but he's pretty good about that. Next slide. That's our Delta. That was flown, I think that's at Toronto earlier this year. But it's I just can't tell you what, it's like being back in the squadron again. So I have to pinch my cheek on every day and say every day's a Saturday and I'm still living the dream. 36 years after flying fighters, so for 36 years I've been jumping in fighters and I'm still doing it, and I can't believe I'm still doing it. And last but not least is our bomb burst. So with that, next slide please, we'll open it up to questions.
Please speak up when you have a question. You got a couple older guys down here. I can hear fine, but Snort's got a little problem.
Say again?
Okay, you have a question? Yes, right here.
Could you comment, could you compare the Mustang and the Corsair to fly?
Could you compare the Mustang and the Corsair?
Yes.
to fly?
I'll start with basic flying qualities. The Mustang is very stable, but the flight controls are very heavy. In G loads, if you have a standard stock Mustang, it's basically 20 pounds per G. So if you're pulling 6 Gs on the Mustang, you have 80 pounds on the stick. So, or excuse me, 100 pounds on the stick. So it is very, very heavy on the flight controls. And the faster you go, it gets very heavy laterally. The Corsair is much lighter on the flight controls. It's about 8 pounds per G. And it has sort of servos on the ailerons, so it feels lighter in ailerons through most of the flight envelope. Though if you really rapid and roll, the airplane will actually, the ailerons will snatch the stick out of your hand, so you have to be careful there. The Mustang is built for speed and endurance and cruising, and it's a lovely airplane, and it doesn't leak oil like the Corsair. So from day-to-day life, the Mustang is much nicer. It's a lot nicer airplane to go on cross countries. You can go a lot farther. You can go fly farther on less gas and do it. But in a dogfight, I would say I would prefer to be in the Corsair. It's got a much bigger wing, so its wing loading is higher. Its thrust to weight is about the same, and with a little lighter, and you can fly it a little bit slower. So in a pure gunfight, I'd prefer to be in the Corsair. But if I had to escort bombers somewhere, I'd want to be in which was designed to do. I'd want to be in the P-51. Both airplanes. I mean, it's an absolute honor and a privilege to sit in there. And every time you start them, they start a little bit differently, so it's a little voodoo dance to get them going. But when the Merlin cranks up or that R-28 cranks up, it's a special event for the pilot.
Yes, right here.
What's your least favorite airplane?
What's your least favorite airplane?
My least favorite airplane. I don't know. I guess, what's that? Well, I know, I enjoy them. I mean, all the ones you saw I fly, I enjoy them all a lot. I mean, let me back it up. Let me just say, make it an easier question. My favorite one is actually, if I had to fly day to day, would be an F5. Because it's just clean, simple, great performing, and it just has great harmonics. The worst one, I guess, the worst airplane I ever flew was an A6, actually. That was, well, it's bomber, so it was a big slug, but.
Also the ugliest.
Ugly, yeah. Yeah, I don't fly ugly airplanes. It's not allowed.
Okay, go ahead right here.
Every call sign name has a story behind it.
I was afraid somebody's going to ask that.
What's the story behind your call sign?
I have multiple answers for that. It was a place far, far away, a long, long time ago, and I don't think she, never mind. Had nothing to do with drugs, so I can tell you that. But there was a large woman in a foreign port involved with it, so.
That's enough for that. Okay, right up here in the back.
Yes?
I'll address this to your adversary pilot background. Have you had a chance to fly the Loki Wolf 190, the Messerschmitt 109, or the Zero?
No, I have not. I haven't gotten the keys to that. I'm still.
Would you repeat the question?
The question was, have I flown a Focke-Wulf 190 or a Japanese Zero? There's a couple 190s that are just starting. They're out there right now flying, and then there's 2 Zeros out there that are flying. And I have a good friend I have friends that fly them both, but I just haven't been able to get the keys to those yet. I'm going to get to a Bearcat first. That's my next piston fighter.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, back in the day, the Air Force claimed that the F-15 was a better dogfighter than the F-14, and to prove it, they said they'd be happy to go against F-14s with live ammunition. What do you think?
There was a time when the Air Force claimed that the F-15 was better than the F-14, and to prove it, they were willing to go 1v1 with a full load of guns.
Well, I can say I've been pretty successful against Eagles in my time. But to answer actually truthfully, if you look at like an F-14A, straight up F-14A versus an F-15, clean, no big tanks and rails on and those kind of things, the F-15 is a higher performing airplane. But it all comes down to, in an end game and all this stuff, it all comes down to the pilot. And the F-14, you could, as I mentioned before, you can configure it certain ways, and all of a sudden it turns into another animal. So when I fought really quality pilots in those kinds of airplanes, and I configured my airplane in the prohibited configuration, I generally wound up, I could present an airplane that was superior to theirs in the slow speed environment. The key is to get them there and then work it from there. So I had my Finney flight in the United States Navy, in the F-14, was a 1v1 against an F-15. It was the F-15 demo pilot, a guy by the name of Haas Clark, and I was in an F-14B, and it was a knife fight. And we normally stop at 5,000 feet. We stopped at 500 feet. And we both had almost no gas. We were emergency fuel, both of us going back into Langley and Oceana. My airplane came back with broken slats and spoilers. I mean, it was a death battle, but it was a good Finney flight. And Haas will agree to that. So and I can say in that case, in that environment low like that, and particularly low altitude. If you got to high altitude, because our wing sweep mechanism, we had our wings would be back even when because it's driven by Mach number, not airspeed. So the big circular wing of the F-15 was made it far superior at high altitude. But down low, the Turkey can be a very, very good match. In fact, in my opinion, a better airplane, if flown right. Up left. Okay. Bringing particularly, the question was, most of the air show airplanes you see up there, well, particularly the more high performance jets, are all Soviet or European airplanes, or not built in the U.S. And the reason is our United States State Department. They have a really weird rule. If you have former U.S. technology, you can't bring it back in this country without jumping through hoop after hoop after hoop. You can bring in an Su-27 on an ATF Form 6 form, bring it in and put it together. And we've done that. Now, of course, the guys in the black sedans came and bought the airplane and took it back, took to somewhere in Nevada, but you can do that. And the MiGs, the L-39s, all these airplanes are easy to bring in from third world. I mean, not from third world, but anything but without U.S. technology. If you want to bring in an old F-5 or an A4 or a whatever, you try and bring that in, and you have to jump through hoop after hoop after hoop. So it's really silly, but that's the rule. So that limits the number of those kind of airplanes on the circuit. So, and the chances of getting an F-18, F-16, or an F-14, I'll go steal one from Iran, but the end game is to get those in the country and fly, almost zilch, unless you can put it to work, I mean, for the government. But other than that, it's air show-wise. CW. Oh, I missed that part. Yeah, I'll do real quick. Sorry about that. The famous knife edge photo. The knife edge photo, if you can get to it, basically, real quickly, it was an authorized maneuver. Keith, don't worry about it. You guys all know the F-14 picture. Well, anyway, there, she's got a picture of it right there. So, end game was, it was as part of my air show. It was a at sea air show. It was the start of my show. So I would start back behind the carrier, below the flight deck on the starboard quarter back here, and then that's the right side stroke, or the right side. Anyway, come in, light the burners about half a mile, then just go right around the fantail. Go right around the fantail in full burner. Now it looks like I'm going to pull into the deck. I'm very close to the ship, but the end game, if you know how an angled deck goes, it goes like this, and then the bow goes up like this. So 1 second later, there was open space in front of me. And then right there, 1 second later, I rolled upright and went into like a double Immelman at the top. So that's basically what it was. The funny story was a ABH-3, a third-class petty officer, took the picture on that dependency cruise with an old camera over by the island, and he came down to the ready room the next day, And he gave us a copy of the picture and the negative. And I looked at the picture and went, oh. I told my ops, make 50 copies and burn the negative. Because I didn't want it to follow me around. Long story short, 30 years later, it's still following me around. But it was a legitimate maneuver. And it was a lot of fun. Doing air shows of the ships is great because in the when we do it, normal air shows in the country, you have to have these various distances from the crowd. And if for a high-performance fighter, you got to be 1,500 feet from the crowd. Well, at the ship, the side of the ship is the crowd line. And you can go supersonic, which is a major bonus.
Well, I hate to say it, but we're out of time, Snort. And you've got
Okay.
this is school night for you because you got an air show tomorrow.
I do.
So we need to keep things moving. But I want to thank you for actually this is the capstone of our year here with the end of celebrating the Centennial Navy Aviation. I say Navy Aviation in this case because here at the museum we're going to celebrate. We're celebrating this year Navy Aviation. Next year we're going to take Marine Aviation. That way we can stretch it out over 2 years. So it's for anything to keep a party going. But thanks for a terrific evening, and we really wish you the very best in the future. Snort will be available out in the Milestones Gallery to sign Anytime Baby, which is the hail and farewell to the Navy F-14 Tomcat. And we ask that you exit via the rear doors, and there'll be some ushers up there to tell you how to get down to the proper level for the signing. Thank you very much. Thanks for this Air and Space Society. Yes.